The Mississippi had a way of speaking, slow, deep, and endless. To some, it was only a river. To Elias Boone, it was a confessional. Every morning since the end of the war, Elias stood on the wooden planks of his ferry dock, the mist curling around his boots like restless spirits. He was a tall man, shoulders bent slightly forward, skin leathered by sun and sorrow. His hands were strong but quiet hands, the kind that had buried friends and lifted strangers. People said Elias had seen too much during the war, that he ferried soldiers, deserters, runaways, even ghosts, and that sometimes he asked passengers to pay more than money. No one knew what that meant exactly. But in 1867 Mississippi, the river held its secrets, and Elias Boone was one of them. That autumn, as the fog hung thick and silver over the water, the river whispered again, and Elias knew someone was coming. Just after sunrise, the mist parted, and a young girl stepped out of it as though the river had made her. She couldn't have been more than 16. Her shawl was blue but faded, the kind of color that once held joy but now held memory. She carried a small wooden trunk, worn at the edges, and her shoes were covered in dust. When she spoke, her voice was trembling but determined. "Sir," she said, "I need to cross the river. I can pay." Elias nodded without looking up. "The fare's 20 cents. The girl reached into her pocket and handed him 2 silver dimes, their surfaces scratched and dull. Elias turned them in his hand. Coins that had passed through too many palms, seen too much hardship. But he didn't move. The girl shifted uneasily. "Is that not enough?" Elias looked up, his gray eyes studying her. "Coin covers the water," he said, "not the weight of what you carry." Her fingers gripped the handle of the trunk. "It's just clothes," she lied softly. Elias's voice was low and calm, but there was something in it that made her heart quiver. "The river don't like lies, miss." She hesitated, eyes glistening. Finally, she whispered, "It's my father's uniform, Union blue. He died at Shiloh." Elias gave a slow nod. "Then your fare's paid in full." He stepped aside and motioned her onto the ferry. As she boarded, she noticed something strange. The ferryman still held her coins. He never took them. The boat drifted into the current, the oars slicing the water with the sound of slow heartbeats. The river was wide, gray, and endless. The girl, Clara, sat on the bench across from Elias. She clutched the trunk like it held her father's ghost. "You knew," she said softly, "before I told you." Elias's eyes stayed on the river. "The water tells me things." Clara frowned. "Rivers don't talk." "They do," he said. "Most folks just don't listen." The ferry rocked gently. She looked into the water. The ripples shimmered like memory, and for a moment she thought she saw shapes beneath the surface. Faces, shadows, uniforms. "What does it tell you about me?" she asked. Elias rode slower now. "That you're running from something. Maybe guilt, maybe grief. Same weight, different name." Clara turned away, tears stinging her eyes. When they reached the far bank, she stepped off silently, her trunk still in hand. She turned to thank him, but Elias was staring into the river, murmuring something she couldn't hear. And when she looked down, the 2 silver dimes still sat on the ferry's floor. That night, the river sang its dark lullaby. Elias sat by his lantern, carving a small cross from driftwood. He'd done this for years, for every soul that crossed with him and told the truth. The crosses lined the edge of the dock, hundreds of them, catching moonlight like silent prayers. He thought about the girl, Clara, her voice, her trembling hands. So young, already carrying so much loss. He remembered his own boy, Jonah, 8 years old when fever took him, back when Elias was still off at war. The same war that had taken the girl's father. He whispered to the river, "I reckon that's payment enough for both of us, ain't it?" The river whispered back in the rustle of reeds and soft current, and Elias, for the first time in a long while, almost smiled. The next morning brought fog thick as milk and a stranger in a long gray coat. His boots were polished, his hat wide-brimmed, and his eyes tired. "Need to cross," he said simply. His accent was northern, but the coat, gray wool, torn at the shoulder, belonged to the losing side. He held out a gold coin. "That should cover it," Elias frowned. "That's too much," the man insisted, forcing the coin into his hand. "Take it." Elias studied the stranger. "Gold buys silence," he said, "but not peace." The man's lips twitched into something between a smile and a snarl. "You talk like a preacher." Elias looked out at the misty water. "No, sir. Just a man who knows what sin looks like when it sinks." They stepped aboard in silence. The gold coin glinted once, then vanished into Elias's coat pocket. Halfway across, thunder growled from the horizon. The wind pushed against them like unseen hands. The man adjusted his coat. "You ever lose someone, Ferryman?" Elias didn't look up. "Everyone loses someone." He paused. "The question is, did you earn their loss?" The man's jaw tightened. I did what I had to. War makes beasts of us all." Elias's arms moved in rhythm with the current. "And the river don't forget beasts." The man glanced into the water and froze. There, beneath the surface, he saw faces. Soldiers, drowning silently. One face looked like his brother's. He gasped, backing away. What is that?" Elias said quietly. "The river remembers every name it swallows." When they reached the far bank, the man stumbled out, leaving behind his gold coin. Elias tossed it into the water. Some debts weren't meant to be kept. Night came again, thick with crickets and ghosts. Elias sat by his small table, an old photograph spread before him, a woman and a boy. His wife, Ruth, and little Jonah. He traced their faces with a trembling finger. "You deserved better than a man who ran from home," he murmured. When the war broke out, Elias had joined the Union cause, driven by ideals and pride. But while he fought for freedom, his family faced hunger and sickness. He'd returned to find 2 graves by the sycamore tree. He had not left the river since. Now, he ferried others as though each soul might be one step closer to forgiveness. His fare was never just coin. Sometimes it was truth. Sometimes repentance. Sometimes hope. But for Elias, the price of silence was always too high. It was early morning when the next passenger came. An old woman wrapped in a wool shawl, clutching something tightly in her arms. "My husband drowned last spring," she said, her voice shaking. "His body's on the far side, buried by strangers. I need to bring him home." Elias nodded slowly. "And what do you carry there?" She unwrapped the cloth, revealing a small, weathered Bible. His. The only thing he had left when they found him. Elias's eyes softened. "You'll cross for no coin, but you'll promise me one thing." "What's that?" she asked. "That you'll read from that book when you reach him. Say his name. Let the river hear it one more time." She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. A. Boone," he said. "Elias Boone." She smiled faintly. "You're a kind man, Mr. Boone." Elias turned his gaze to the current. "Kindness ain't my trade, ma'am. Balance is." Later that week, a barefoot boy appeared by the dock. He couldn't have been more than 10, with a torn shirt and a sack slung over his shoulder. "You takin' folks to heaven, mister?" he asked curiously. Elias chuckled. "Not yet, just across the water." "My ma says the river steals souls." Elias looked at the gray water. "Only the ones who lie to it." The boy squinted. "You ever lie to it?" Elias stared at the current for a long moment. "Once," he said softly, "and I've been paying ever since." The boy frowned, unsure what that meant, but before he could ask, Elias handed him an apple from his pocket. "Eat, son," he said gently. "Truth tastes better on a full stomach." The boy grinned, bit into the apple, and sat by the dock watching the ferry drift like a dream across the wide brown water. That night, the river rose in anger, swollen, furious, unkind. Wind howled through the cypress trees, lightning flashing like cannon fire. Elias was tying down his ferry ropes when a man came running from the woods soaked to the bone. "Please," the man shouted. "My wife's in labor, across the river. The doctor can't get there without you." Elias looked at the raging current. "Too dangerous tonight." The man's face was desperate. "I'll pay double, triple, anything." Elias stared at the black churning water, then at the man's trembling hands. "Keep your coin," he said, untying the rope. "Hold on tight." As the ferry pushed into the storm, thunder cracked overhead. The man clung to the side as waves slapped the hull. Elias's muscles burned against the current. "You got children already?" he shouted. "One boy," the man yelled back. "He's waiting for his mama." Elias's eyes hardened with memory. "Then you hold on, for both of them." They crossed through lightning and fear, each stroke a fight against the dark. When they finally touched shore, the man jumped off and ran, shouting, "Mary," into the night. Elias sat in the rain, breath ragged, heart pounding. "That's payment enough," he whispered, letting the river carry away the rest. The storm left the river swollen and bruised, tree limbs caught in its teeth. Elias's ferry had survived, but barely. He sat on the dock that morning, drenched and silent, watching the debris drift by. A half-sunk barrel, a hat, a child's wooden toy. He thought of the man he ferried the night before, and of the baby being born across the river at that very moment. Maybe new life was the only thing stronger than death. Footsteps broke his thought. It was the same man, soaked, exhausted, but smiling through tears. "It's a girl," he said. "Healthy. My Mary's safe too." Elias nodded slowly. "That's good." The man reached for his coat pocket, fumbling with a handful of coins. "Here. You earned every cent." Elias shook his head. "Keep it." The man's brow furrowed. "But you risked your life for us." Elias's voice softened. "I've been risking it a long time, son. Maybe last night I finally used it right." The man stood silent, then placed the coins gently on the dock anyway. As a token, not payment. Elias watched him walk away through the morning mist, and for a brief moment he felt something shift inside him, something uncoiled. The river, still restless, seemed to sigh in approval. By afternoon, word of the storm crossing had spread through the small river town. Folks whispered that Elias Boone had rode through lightning like a man possessed. Some said it wasn't the first time. Some said he ferried more than the living. The sheriff, a thick-set man with a gray mustache, came riding down to the dock that evening. His boots thudded on the wet planks. "Boone," he said, spitting into the river. "Folks been talking. They say you turned down coin, asking for promises and confessions instead." Elias didn't look up. "Talk's free. Truth ain't." The sheriff squinted at him. "You ain't no priest. You run a ferry, not a church." Elias gave a slow nod. "Ain't that what a ferry is, Sheriff? A place between one side and the other?" The sheriff frowned. "You just make sure it stays legal. No more ghost stories. No more refusing customers. People start thinking you're touched, you'll lose this dock." Elias finally turned his gaze to him. "If I lose it, maybe that's the river's choice." The sheriff sighed, shaking his head. "You're a strange man, Boone. Always were." As the sheriff walked away, The sky began to glow with sunset, gold bleeding into the water. And Elias whispered, almost to himself, "Strange men are the ones who've seen both sides." A week passed in quiet fog until one morning, a soft knock echoed against the old ferry shack. When Elias opened the door, there stood Clara, the girl with the blue shawl. Her eyes looked clearer now, but her hand still trembled as she held a sealed envelope. "It's from my father," she said. "Someone found it in his coat pocket, years after the battle." Elias stepped aside, motioning her in. She sat by the window, the letter pressed against her chest. "I can't bring myself to read it," she whispered. "Could you?" Her voice broke. Elias nodded, took the paper, and unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was shaky but firm. "My dearest Clara, if I do not return, tell my little girl that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's crossing anyway, even when your heart trembles, even when the current's too strong. Father." When he finished, the girl sobbed quietly, clutching the letter. Elias felt the words echo through his bones. Crossing anyway. He stared out the window, at the river, the fog, the ferry waiting like a patient soul. When she left, she pressed her 2 silver dimes back into his hand. "Keep them," she said softly, "for the next person who can't pay." And she walked away, lighter than when she'd arrived. Twilight came sharp and sudden that evening. The sun fell behind the cypress trees, and the river took on the color of iron. Elias was locking the dock gate when he noticed a man standing at the far end, tall, motionless, wearing black from head to toe. "I need to cross," the man said. His voice was smooth, low, unsettlingly calm. Elias nodded warily. "Fare's 20 cents. The man smiled faintly. "You know my price isn't coin." Elias froze, his breath catching. He'd heard that voice before, not in life, but in dreams, in nightmares, in prayers. The ferryman's grip tightened on the oar. "You've come for me," he said quietly. The stranger's grin widened. "It's been time, Elias." Without another word, Elias stepped onto the ferry and the stranger followed. The oars touched the water, and the current carried them silently into the fog. The fog grew thick, swallowing the shoreline. The air felt colder, heavier, like the breath of something ancient. "You've ferried many across," the stranger said, his tone almost kind. "Help them find peace. But what about your own crossing?" Elias rowed in silence. The wood creaked. The river hissed. "I still owe," Elias muttered. The man tilted his head. "You can't buy redemption, Boone. Not with pity. Not with other people's tears." "Maybe not," Elias said slowly. "But I can earn it. One soul at a time." The stranger laughed, a low, hollow sound that made the fog ripple. "You think the river forgives?" "I think it remembers," Elias replied. "And remembering's the first step to forgiving." The man's expression changed, almost curious. "Then let's see what it remembers about you." He pointed to the water. "Look down." Elias peered into the dark current and gasped. Beneath the ferry, faces shimmered in the depths. The girl's father, the widow's husband, the Confederate soldier, even the young boy who once sat by the dock. And then, 2 faces he knew better than his own. His wife, Ruth, his little boy, Jonah. Their eyes were calm, forgiving. Elias's hands trembled on the oars. "What do you want from me?" he whispered. The stranger's voice grew soft. "Your truth, ferryman. The real fare." Elias shut his eyes. The river around them grew louder, wilder. "I told myself I went to war for freedom," he said. "But I was running. I was scared. I left them alone when they needed me most. And by the time I came home, the fever took them." His voice cracked. "I never said goodbye." The stranger leaned forward. "And every soul you ferried since, You were trying to say it through them." Elias nodded slowly, tears falling into the water. "Yes." The stranger watched him for a long moment, and for the first time, his expression softened. "Then maybe you've already paid your fare," he said quietly. The fog began to thin. The stranger's form grew transparent, like smoke in sunlight. Elias reached out. "Who are you?" The stranger smiled faintly. "Some call me Death, but you—" He placed a hand over Elias's heart. "You can call me Peace." And with that, he was gone. Elias sat alone on the ferry, the oars drifting. The river had stilled. No wind, no sound, just calm. He whispered into the quiet, "Thank you." When morning came, the river looked different, golden, gentle, alive. Elias stood on the dock, his coat hanging loose on his shoulders. His hair glowed silver in the light. Waiting for him was the same barefoot boy who used to sit by the dock, now a little older. "You coming back, mister?" the boy asked, his voice innocent as dawn. Elias smiled faintly. "I think my crossing's done, son." He handed the boy his oar, worn smooth from years of use. "Keep folks honest," he said, "and listen to the water. It knows more than we do." The boy nodded solemnly, clutching the oar. "I'll do my best." Elias stepped onto the ferry one last time. The river took him softly, like a mother carrying her child, and as the mist swallowed him, he was smiling. Years passed. The boy, now a man, kept the ferry running. People said he could read a soul just by how it stepped onto his boat. Some said he whispered to the water before each crossing. He charged the same fare, 20 cents. But sometimes, if he looked into your eyes and saw something heavy, he'd wave the coins away. "Keep your money," he'd say. "Tell me what you're carrying instead." Travelers told stories about him. They said he learned from a ferryman who'd once rode through lightning and ghosts, a man who demanded more than fare and gave more than forgiveness. At sunrise, the river looked almost holy. Mist curled low, the world wrapped in silver and gold. And sometimes, just for a moment, the new ferryman would look down into the water and swear he saw an old man's reflection beside his own. Elias Boone, calm, smiling, watching. The ferryman who demanded more than fare. He hadn't been taken by the river. He had become part of it. The water rippled softly, whispering its eternal hymn. Every soul must cross. Some pay with coin. Some pay with truth. But only those who forgive themselves reach the other side. And as the sun broke through the fog, the river gleamed like glass, endless, patient, and full of memory. The Mississippi kept flowing, carrying the stories of the living and the lost, and one ferryman's peace forever.